My brother served me an eviction notice for our late aunt's apartment, a place I had every right to inherit. He thought he had me cornered, a grieving woman with no fight left. He was wrong, because our aunt had left me one final, hidden gift, the truth that would unravel everything. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The grief was a physical weight, a thick woolen blanket that had been smothering me for weeks. Ever since Aunt Helen passed, the sprawling Manhattan apartment we had shared felt both cavernous and suffocating. Her scent, a faint mix of lavender and old books, still clung to the curtains. Her favorite armchair still bore the faint impression of her form. Every corner held a ghost, every silence echoed with the memory of her laughter. It was in this fragile state, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking, that the mail arrived. I sorted through the usual stack of condolences and junk mail with a leaden hand. Then I saw it, a crisp, business-sized envelope with a law firm's name printed in the corner. My brother, Ethan, was the executor of the will, so I assumed it was some routine piece of estate paperwork he had forwarded. I slit it open with a butter knife, my mind already drifting to the list of thank you cards I still needed to write. The words on the page were cold, sterile, and utterly incomprehensible at first. Notice to quit. My eyes scanned the legalese, tripping over phrases like unauthorized occupant, termination of tenancy, and legal proceedings. The address listed was my own. The name of the plaintiff was the estate of Helen Miller, represented by Executor Ethan Miller, my brother. The notice gave me 30 days to vacate the premises. I read it again, and a third time. The paper trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from a profound, seismic shock that seemed to rattle the very foundations of my world. An eviction notice, from my own brother, for my own home. It felt like a cruel, impossible joke. This wasn't just an apartment, it was the home I had shared with my aunt for the last 5 years. I had moved in at her request, leaving behind my own smaller place in Brooklyn to become her companion, her advocate, and, in the end, her full-time caregiver. I was on the official paperwork, recognized by the building management. I had paid my share of the bills, my name on the utilities. We had spoken with a lawyer years ago who assured us that under New York City's labyrinthine rent control laws, my co-residency made me the legal successor to the lease. It was a fact as solid and dependable as the pre-war building itself. My first instinct was to call him. This had to be a mistake, a horrible bureaucratic error made by some overzealous lawyer who didn't understand the situation. I dialed Ethan's number, my heart hammering against my ribs. It rang once, twice, then clicked to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Ethan. Leave a message." His voice, usually so smooth and confident, now sounded slick and evasive. "Ethan, it's Jennifer," I said, my own voice tight and shaky. I just got a letter. From your lawyer, I think. It's an eviction notice. This has to be a mistake. Please call me back as soon as you get this. It's not funny." I hung up and stared at the phone, willing it to ring. It remained silent. I tried again 15 minutes later. Straight to voicemail. A cold dread began to seep into my veins, pushing past the shock and settling deep in my bones. This wasn't a mistake. An error could be explained. An error wouldn't ignore my call. This was intentional. The silence of the apartment pressed in on me. I looked around at the life Aunt Helen and I had built within these walls. The faded Persian rug in the living room, worn down by decades of footsteps. The towering shelves of books she had collected, a library of her life's passions. The small, sunny spot by the window where I had set up my desk to work from home so I could be near her. Ethan and his wife, Sabrina, had always referred to it as Helen's apartment. To me, it was simply home. The difference in phrasing, I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity, was everything. To them, it was an asset, a piece of prime Manhattan real estate, a rent-controlled gem that once emptied of its tenant could be sold for a fortune. I had heard them talk about it at family dinners, their voices hushed with a kind of greedy reverence. "Can you imagine what this place is worth, Jen?" Ethan would say, clapping me on the shoulder. "3 bedrooms with a view of the park? It's a lottery ticket. I had always laughed it off, assuming it was just his typical talk. Ethan was a real estate agent after all. He saw the world in terms of square footage and property values, but I never imagined he would see his own family, his grieving sister, as an obstacle to be removed in order to cash in that ticket. I sank into Aunt Helen's armchair, the soft, worn velvet a poor substitute for her comforting presence. She had been the glue of our fractured family, the one who mediated the peace between my quiet, bookish nature and Ethan's aggressive ambition. With her gone, the buffer had vanished. I was alone, facing a version of my brother I had never truly allowed myself to see. The notice wasn't just a legal document, it was a declaration. It said that my care, my sacrifice, and my love meant nothing. It said that in the calculus of my brother's life, I was worth less than a commission check. Hours passed. The sun set, casting long shadows across the living room floor. The apartment grew dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, the eviction notice clutched in my hand, the crisp edges digging into my palm. My phone remained silent. The message was clear. Ethan wasn't going to call me back. He wasn't going to explain. He had made his move, and now he was waiting for me to break. He had declared war, and I was standing on the battlefield without a shield, without a weapon, completely alone. The sterile white envelope held more than just a legal threat. It held the death of the family I thought I knew. The first 24 hours after the notice arrived were a blur of numb disbelief. I drifted through the apartment like a ghost, my feet tracing familiar paths over the hardwood floors. I'd find myself standing in the doorway to Aunt Helen's room, her bed perfectly made, a book resting on her nightstand as if she had just stepped out for a moment. The quiet was a constant, screaming reminder of what I had lost, and now, what I stood to lose all over again. My mind kept replaying conversations, searching for clues I had missed. I remembered a talk with Helen just a few months before she passed. We were drinking tea, the late afternoon sun streaming through the large windows that overlooked the park. "This place is yours, Jenny," she had said, her voice thin but firm. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise. You've earned it. You've made it a home again." Her hand, frail and spotted with age, had gripped mine with surprising strength. We both knew she was talking about Ethan. We just never imagined how explicit the threat would become. Late that evening, my phone finally buzzed. It was Ethan. My breath caught in my throat, a tiny, foolish flicker of hope igniting within me. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe his lawyer had acted without his full knowledge. "Jen," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. It was his business voice, clipped, efficient, and distant. "Ethan, what is this?" I asked, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I got an eviction notice. It says I have to be out in 30 days. This is a mistake, right?" There was a pause. I could hear the faint murmur of a television in the background. "It's not a mistake, Jen," he said calmly. "It's just a formality. The estate has to be settled." "A formality?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "Ethan, this is my home. I live here. I'm the successor tenant. We talked about this with Aunt Helen. The law is very clear." "Well, my lawyer seems to think it's more of a legal gray area," he replied smoothly, the phrase sounding rehearsed. "Look, as executor, I have a fiduciary duty to all the beneficiaries of the will. That's you, me, and the cousins. My responsibility is to maximize the value of the estate. A vacant, market-rate apartment is the estate's primary asset. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar sale, Jen. This is life-changing for everyone." His casual dismissal of my life, my home, as an impediment to his financial windfall was like a physical blow. "So you're just kicking me out? After everything?" Suddenly, another voice joined the call. It was Sabrina. "Jenny, sweetie, don't be so dramatic," she cooed, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sympathy that sets your teeth on edge. "No one is kicking you out. We just need to follow the proper legal procedures. We'll even help you find a new place. A cute little one-bedroom somewhere. This apartment is far too big for you anyway." The sheer audacity of her statement left me momentarily speechless. She spoke of the home where I had spent the last 5 years tending to a dying woman as if it were an oversized handbag I no longer had use for. "This is my home, Sabrina," I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. "Ethan is just doing his job," she continued, ignoring me. "He has to be fair to everyone. It wouldn't be right for one person to get the benefit of a multi-million-dollar asset while everyone else gets a fraction. We have to be practical." Practical, the word hung in the air, cold and sharp. My years of care, the nights I spent awake monitoring Aunt Helen's breathing, the career opportunities I'd put on hold, none of that was practical. Only the money mattered. I ended the call, my hand trembling. The hope I had clung to was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. They were not just misguided, they were ruthless. They had planned this. They had likely been waiting for Aunt Helen to pass so they could put their scheme into motion. I walked into the living room, my gaze falling on the massive, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that flanked the fireplace. They were Aunt Helen's pride and joy, filled with everything from classic literature to obscure history tomes and well-worn poetry anthologies. Ethan and Sabrina had always seen them as clutter. "Imagine this wall painted a nice, clean white," Sabrina had mused during their last visit, gesturing vaguely at the shelves. "It would really open up the space." Aunt Helen had just smiled politely, but later that evening, she had turned to me. "They see the apartment, the furniture, the assets," she'd whispered. "They never learned how to see what's truly valuable in a home." As I stood there, surrounded by the silent testament of my aunt's life, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. The grief was still there, but now it was joined by something else, resolve. They had miscalculated. They saw me as Jennifer, the quiet, agreeable niece, the grieving caregiver too weak to fight back. They saw a woman who could be easily managed with legal jargon and a small settlement, but they had forgotten the woman Aunt Helen had raised me to be, strong, resilient, and resourceful. They had forgotten my years as a paralegal, my comfort with the very language they were trying to use against me. I ran a hand over the spines of the books, the worn leather and cracked paper a familiar comfort. They saw walls to be painted and floors to be refinished. I saw a sanctuary built on love and memory. And in that moment, I knew I would not let them take it from me. A thought, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the fog of my sorrow. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I didn't know what it was yet, but I felt its presence, a hidden truth waiting to be discovered, tucked away somewhere within the fortress of my aunt's legacy. They had started the war, but I would be the one to finish it. To understand the depth of Ethan's betrayal, you have to understand what came before it. You have to understand the sacrifice. 5 years ago, I was on a clear career path at a prestigious law firm in downtown Manhattan. I was a senior paralegal in the corporate litigation department, respected for my meticulous research and unwavering attention to detail. I had my own apartment in Brooklyn, a vibrant social life, and a future that felt mapped out and secure. Then came the call from Aunt Helen's doctor. Her chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was worsening. She was having trouble managing on her own. The doctor recommended assisted living, a phrase that made my independent, fiercely proud aunt recoil in horror. "I will not be put out to pasture in some beige room, Jennifer," she'd told me, her voice trembling with indignation. "I will die in my own home, surrounded by my books." Ethan and I went to see her. He arrived in his perfectly tailored suit, already looking at his watch. He listened to her for 10 minutes before launching into a polished presentation about the financial benefits of selling the apartment now to fund a top-of-the-line care facility. He had brochures. He spoke of it as a smart investment, a way to leverage her primary asset. I watched my aunt's face fall. He wasn't listening to her, he was managing a portfolio. When he left for another important meeting, I stayed. I looked at the woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own, and I saw the fear in her eyes. That night, I made a decision. I gave notice on my Brooklyn apartment, negotiated a remote, part-time contract with my firm, and moved my life into Aunt Helen's second bedroom. The next 5 years were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and late-night emergencies. My life shrank to the confines of the apartment and the surrounding city blocks. I became an expert in oxygen tanks and insurance paperwork. My once busy social calendar was replaced by quiet evenings of reading aloud to Helen or watching old black and white movies. It was exhausting, demanding, and often heartbreaking work. It was also the most meaningful thing I have ever done. I was giving back a fraction of the love and stability she had given me after my own parents' messy divorce. Ethan's contribution during this time was largely performative. He and Sabrina would sweep in for holiday dinners, bearing extravagant gifts like cashmere throws or gourmet food baskets that Helen couldn't eat. They'd stay for precisely 90 minutes, filling the apartment with loud, cheerful talk about their latest vacation or a house they were flipping upstate. They asked about Helen's health in the same tone one might ask about the weather, their eyes already scanning the room. I'll never forget one Christmas about 2 years ago. Sabrina, an interior designer with an eye for expensive minimalism, was walking through the living room, running her hand along the back of the antique sofa. "You know, Jenny," she said, her voice bright and conspiratorial, "when the time comes, we could do wonders with this place. Knock down this wall to the kitchen, create an open concept space. The light in here is incredible. It just needs to be updated." Aunt Helen, who was sitting in her armchair, overheard her. She didn't say a word, but I saw her grip the armrests, her knuckles turning white. She looked at Sabrina's polished, manicured hands and then at my own, which were often dry from constant hand-washing and applying her medical creams. The contrast was stark. Sabrina saw a property with good bones and potential for profit. I saw a home, a life, a history. Ethan was worse in a way because he cloaked his greed in the language of familial concern. "You're doing a great job, Jen. We're all so grateful," he'd say, while simultaneously steering the conversation toward the will. "Has Helen gotten her affairs in order? It's so important. I just want to make sure she's protected." What he meant was, I want to make sure my inheritance is protected. He'd lobbied hard to be named the executor, arguing that his real estate experience made him the logical choice to handle her biggest asset. Aunt Helen, weary and wanting to avoid a fight, had reluctantly agreed, a decision I could now see she must have deeply regretted. They saw my role as a caretaker as a temporary arrangement, a placeholder. They assumed that once Aunt Helen was gone, I would simply pack my bags and disappear, leaving them to the lucrative task of dismantling her life for profit. They never saw me as a permanent fixture, as part of the home itself. They saw me as the help. My sacrifice was not a gift of love to them, it was a convenience. I was saving the estate the cost of a full-time nurse, keeping the property pristine for its eventual sale. The eviction notice was not an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of years of them seeing Aunt Helen's home as a future windfall and me as the person minding the store until closing time. The betrayal wasn't just in the legal document itself, but in the casual cruelty of it, in the complete erasure of my last 5 years. They weren't just trying to take my home, they were trying to invalidate my entire relationship with the woman we both called family. They were attempting to reduce my love and devotion to a simple footnote in a real estate transaction. That was the deepest cut of all. For 2 days, I allowed myself to wallow in the shock and the sorrow. I sat with my anger, letting it simmer until the shaking in my hands stopped and a cold, hard clarity took its place. The turning point came on the 3rd morning. I woke up with the early light, the familiar sounds of the city filtering through the windows, and I knew I was done being a victim. My grief for Aunt Helen was a sacred thing, and I would not allow Ethan and Sabrina to corrupt it with their avarice. My professional instincts, dormant for so long while I played the role of caregiver, roared back to life. I was a paralegal. It was time to start acting like one. I went to my desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top, I wrote case file, Miller v. Miller. I spent the next several hours compiling my evidence. I gathered every document that proved my co-residency. There was the lease amendment from 5 years ago, officially adding my name as an occupant. I had years of bank statements showing direct transfers to my aunt for my half of the rent and utilities. I printed out copies of the Con Edison and cable bills, both of which were in my name. I found my voter registration card, my driver's license, and my tax returns, all listing this address as my legal residence. Laying it all out on the dining room table, I could feel the strength returning to me. This wasn't just a moral argument anymore. It was a legal one, and the facts were overwhelmingly on my side. New York City's succession rights are designed precisely for situations like this, to protect family members who live with and care for tenants in rent-controlled apartments. Ethan's lawyer calling it a gray area wasn't just misleading. It was a deliberate falsehood, a scare tactic designed to make me fold. With my preliminary evidence organized, my mind turned to the conversation I'd had with Aunt Helen. If he ever tries anything funny, the answer is with the poets. It had sounded cryptic at the time, but now it felt like a direct instruction, a key to a lock I hadn't known existed. I walked over to the towering bookshelves in the living room. It was a daunting task. There were hundreds of books. Where would I even begin? I closed my eyes and tried to remember. Aunt Helen didn't. Just love all poetry, she had her favorites. The ones she returned to again and again, their pages soft and worn from her touch. There was Keats, Frost, and Dickinson, but her absolute favorite, the one she quoted most often, was Edna St. Vincent Millay. She admired Millay's fierce independence, her unapologetic passion. There were 3 Millay collections on the shelf. I pulled out the first 2, flipping through the pages, but found nothing. Then I took down the third. It was an older hardcover edition of A Few Figs from Thistles, its blue cover faded and frayed at the edges. It felt heavier than it should. I ran my fingers along the inside of the back cover and felt it, a subtle thickness, a slight bulge in the cardboard lining. My heart began to beat faster. Using the edge of a letter opener, I carefully pried the paper lining away from the board. Tucked inside a meticulously cut-out hollow was a sealed, cream-colored envelope. My name, Jennifer, was written on the front in Aunt Helen's familiar, elegant script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter several pages long, written on her personal stationery. The second, stapled behind it, was a formal, notarized statement. I read the letter first. It was her voice, clear and strong on the page, a message from beyond the grave. She wrote of her love for me, her gratitude for my care, and her profound worry over Ethan's character. "He is a good boy in many ways," she wrote, "but he has a blindness when it comes to money. He equates wealth with worth, and I fear it has corrupted his heart. I have made him the executor because I hoped the responsibility would mature him, but I cannot trust him with your future." She went on to explain that she had spoken with her lawyer, the same one who had advised us on the succession rights, and had this formal declaration drawn up. It explicitly stated her wish that I, Jennifer Miller, inherit the tenancy of the apartment upon her death. It detailed my years of co-residency and caregiving as the basis for this wish. And then came the critical part. "I have had this document notarized," she wrote, "to serve as a formal record of my intent should Ethan ever act against my wishes and your legal rights. He does not know it exists. It is your shield, my dear. Use it if you must." Tears streamed down my face as I read, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and love. Even in her final months, when she was at her weakest, Aunt Helen had been looking out for me, protecting me. She had anticipated this betrayal and had forged a weapon for me to fight back. This changed everything. The notarized document wasn't just a statement of her wishes, it was a powerful piece of evidence that would prove Ethan was acting in bad faith. An executor has a legal duty to act in accordance with the known wishes of the deceased. This letter proved he was doing the exact opposite. This was my clever trap. The next morning, I was no longer just a paralegal playing defense. I was a client on the offensive. I spent hours researching the best tenant rights lawyers in New York City. I found one whose name came up again and again, a woman named Maria Flores, known for being a tenacious, unstoppable advocate for people just like me. I called her office, and armed with my meticulously organized file and the bombshell document from my aunt, I scheduled a consultation for the following day. I walked out of my apartment into the bright city sunshine, feeling not like a victim, but like a warrior heading into battle. The board was set, and I finally had my queen. Maria Flores's office was in a modest building downtown, a world away from the gleaming corporate towers I was used to. The space was cluttered with files and legal texts, the walls adorned with framed newspaper clippings celebrating victories against powerful landlords. Maria herself was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I instantly trusted. She listened to my story without interruption, her expression growing sterner as I spoke. When I finished, I pushed the stack of documents across her desk, with Aunt Helen's notarized letter placed right on top. She read the letter carefully, her eyebrows raising slightly. She then spent another 20 minutes reviewing my evidence of co-residency. Finally, she looked up at me, a grim smile on her face. "Your brother and his lawyer aren't just in a gray area, Ms. Miller," she said, her voice laced with steel. "They're standing in the middle of a freeway at rush hour. What they're doing is a blatant attempt at an illegal eviction, not to mention a shocking breach of his fiduciary duty as executor. They think you'll roll over. They're in for a surprise." The sense of relief that washed over me was immense. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had solid ground beneath my feet. Maria's first move was to send a formal response to Ethan's lawyer. It was a masterfully crafted letter, professional but icy. It laid out, in excruciating detail, my undeniable legal right to the tenancy under New York City Rent Control Law Section 2204.6. It included copies of my lease amendment, utility bills, and other proofs of residency. It established a clear, unimpeachable timeline of my 5 years in the apartment. And then, it mentioned the ace up our sleeve, but only obliquely. "Furthermore," Maria wrote, "we are in possession of a notarized document from the deceased, Ms. Helen Miller, which explicitly states her intentions regarding the tenancy of the apartment and her designated successor. We are confident this document will be of great interest to a probate court judge." We didn't send a copy of the letter. Maria wanted to hold that back to see how they would react to the threat of it. The reaction was swift. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His tone was no longer calm and distant. It was agitated, angry. "What do you think you're doing, Jen?" he snapped without so much as a hello. "Hiring a lawyer? What is this nonsense about a notarized document?" I took a deep breath, channeling Maria's cool confidence. "I'm protecting my home, Ethan," I said calmly. "Something you should have been doing as executor." "I am doing my job," he retorted, his voice rising. "My job is to get the best return for the estate. For everyone, you're being incredibly selfish, holding a multi-million-dollar asset hostage." "The apartment isn't an asset to be liquidated, it's a home. It's my home," I said, my voice steady. "And Aunt Helen made sure it would stay that way." He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, please, you're talking about some sentimental letter? Helen was sick, Jen. She was on all sorts of medication. She wasn't in her right mind. A document like that won't hold up in court for a second." And there it was. The moment he tried to use our aunt's illness, the very reason I had dedicated 5 years of my life to her care, as a weapon against her. He didn't deny the letter's existence. He just went straight to trying to invalidate it by questioning her mental competence. It was a vile, desperate move, and it told me everything I needed to know. He was scared. He knew what the letter said, or at least he could guess, and he knew how damning it was. This was the confrontation I had been waiting for, the moment the masks came off. "She was perfectly lucid, Ethan, and you know it," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. "She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew who you were." "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. "It means she knew you would do this," I replied. "She saw this coming, and she prepared for it." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to find a new angle of attack. "Fine," he said, his voice changing, adopting a placating tone that was somehow more insulting than his anger. "Look, Jen, let's be reasonable. I don't want to fight. This is tearing the family apart. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement, a significant one, $200,000 from the proceeds of the sale, tax-free. You can get a great place with that, a fresh start. Just sign the papers, and we can all move on. It was a classic bully tactic. First threats, then a bribe. He was treating me like a common squatter to be paid off. The offer, as substantial as it was, felt like an insult. He was trying to buy my home, my history, and my dignity for a fraction of what the apartment was worth to him. "My home is not for sale, Ethan," I said, the words clear and final. "I am not moving on. I'm staying right where I belong. And if you continue with this, I won't just see you in housing court. I'll see you in probate court. We'll let a judge decide if you've honored Aunt Helen's wishes." I hung up before he could respond. My heart was pounding, but I felt a surge of empowerment. I had faced him, and I hadn't flinched. His desperate lies, his attempts at manipulation, his pathetic bribe, they had all bounced off the armor Aunt Helen had given me. He had confirmed his guilt with his own words, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was losing. Ethan's failed attempt to bully and bribe me only made him more desperate. Realizing he couldn't intimidate me directly, he and Sabrina escalated their campaign, turning to the one battlefield where they thought they held the advantage, the family. They began a systematic campaign of calls to our cousins, aunts, and uncles, spinning a carefully crafted narrative. In their version of the story, I was the villain, a greedy, entitled freeloader trying to cheat everyone out of their rightful inheritance. "Jennifer is squatting in the apartment," Sabrina would say, her voice laced with dramatic sorrow. "She's refusing to let Ethan sell it, which means none of the beneficiaries, including you, will see a dime. We've offered her a generous settlement to find a new place, but she's being completely unreasonable." The poison worked. My phone started ringing with calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were confused, others were openly hostile. "Jen, what's going on?" one cousin asked. "Ethan said you're holding up the whole will." Another uncle was more direct. "You need to think about the rest of the family. It's not fair for you to keep that valuable property all to yourself." Each call was a fresh wound. These were people who had sent sympathy cards just weeks ago, praising my devotion to Aunt Helen. Now, swayed by the promise of a payout from the apartment sale, they were questioning my motives and pressuring me to surrender. The emotional toll was immense. I felt isolated, painted as the villain in my own story. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if fighting was worth the cost of tearing my family apart. But then I would think of Aunt Helen's letter, of her faith in me, and my resolve would harden again. This was exactly the kind of pressure she had anticipated. Meanwhile, my lawyer, Maria, was building our case, and her investigation was uncovering the true extent of Ethan's deception. She subpoenaed his phone and email records related to his duties as executor. What she found was staggering. Ethan hadn't just been idly contemplating a sale, he had been actively and aggressively marketing the apartment for months, even before Aunt Helen had passed. The records revealed a deep-dive correspondence with a high-end real estate developer known for buying out entire rent-controlled buildings, evicting the tenants, and converting them into luxury condos. Ethan had sent them photos, floor plans, and had even allowed a surveyor into the apartment under the guise of an insurance assessment, while I was out picking up Helen's prescriptions. He had a tentative, off-market deal lined up for an astronomical sum, far more than the apartment would fetch in a standard sale. His commission alone would be in the high six figures. This was the smoking gun. This wasn't just a greedy brother trying to sell a family property. This was a calculated, premeditated scheme. He wasn't just breaching his fiduciary duty, he had obliterated it. He was using his position as executor to orchestrate a secret, highly lucrative side deal for his own personal enrichment. Maria knew it was time for a second, more powerful confrontation. She arranged a formal conference call, me, her, Ethan, and his lawyer. The tone of this call was entirely different. There was no room for blustering or emotional appeals. This was a legal execution. "Mr. Miller," Maria began, her voice cold and precise, "we have your phone records. We have your emails. We have the full details of your pending agreement with Sterling Properties, an agreement you initiated 3 months before your aunt's death." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. I could picture Ethan's face, the confident smirk wiped clean off, replaced by pale, raw panic. Maria continued, her voice relentless. You used your position as executor to defraud the estate you were sworn to protect. You hid a multi-million-dollar development deal from the other beneficiaries. You lied to my client and served her with a fraudulent eviction notice to clear the way for your personal payday. This goes far beyond a simple family dispute. This is professional misconduct. This is fraud. She let the words hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. And now, she said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its menace, I'm going to read you something. This is from the notarized declaration of Helen Miller, dated 2 weeks before her passing. She read key excerpts from the letter. She read the part where Aunt Helen praised my care and sacrifice. She read the part expressing her deep disappointment in Ethan's materialism. And then she read the final, devastating sentence. I trust Jennifer to honor my memory and our home. I cannot say the same for my nephew, whose hunger for money has made him a stranger to me. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan's lawyer finally cleared his throat, sounding flustered. My client, we may have been acting on incomplete information. Save it, Maria cut in sharply. Your client is a real estate agent. He knew exactly what he was doing. And now, so do we. The call ended shortly after. The spell was broken. The truth, in its full and ugly detail, was out in the open. Ethan's web of lies had been torn apart, and he was now dangling, exposed for everyone to see. There would be no more family phone calls, no more whispered accusations. There was only the hard, irrefutable evidence of his betrayal. The final showdown was inevitable. The final confrontation wasn't held in a public place or at a tense family dinner. The drama of our family had moved beyond that. It was to take place in the sterile, neutral territory of a law firm's conference room, a space designed for high-stakes negotiations and the dismantling of disputes. Maria had insisted on a formal mediation session, a final chance for Ethan to surrender before she filed the papers with the probate court that would ruin him. It was just the four of us, me and Maria on one side of the gleaming mahogany table, Ethan and his lawyer on the other. For the first time, Sabrina was not present. The battle had become too real, too legal, for her brand of superficial support. Ethan looked terrible. The confident, slick real estate broker was gone, replaced by a pale, haggard man who couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the table, his hands clenched in his lap. His lawyer, a man who had clearly not been paid enough to deal with this level of misconduct, looked deeply uncomfortable. Maria began without preamble. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out our case with the calm, systematic precision of a surgeon. She started with my undeniable succession rights, placing a thick binder of evidence on the table. Exhibit A, the legal basis for my client's tenancy. Then, she moved on to Ethan's actions. She detailed his premature and clandestine dealings with the developer, presenting copies of the most damning emails. Exhibit B, the clear, premeditated breach of fiduciary duty. Finally, she picked up a single protected sheet of paper. It was the original notarized letter from Aunt Helen. And Exhibit C, she said, her voice softening with reverence. The last will and true testament of a woman's intent, which you, Mr. Miller, chose to willfully ignore. She slid the letter across the table. Ethan's lawyer picked it up and read it, his face growing grimmer with every line. He passed it to Ethan, who stared at our aunt's handwriting as if it were a ghost. I watched his shoulders slump, the last of the fight draining out of him. The letter was not just a legal document, it was a final, personal judgment from the woman whose approval he had always craved and never truly earned. When he finished reading, Maria laid out his options. Her tone was flat, devoid of triumph. It was the voice of inevitable consequences. Option 1, she stated, is the path of reason. You will immediately sign a legally binding agreement to withdraw the eviction notice. You will sign all necessary documents to formally recognize Jennifer's succession to the tenancy. You will resign as executor of the estate, effective immediately. In return, Ms. Miller will agree not to pursue civil damages for emotional distress and harassment. We will all walk out of this room, and this matter will be concluded." She paused, letting the offer settle in the quiet room. "Option 2, she continued, is the path of consequence. If you refuse, my paralegal will walk the documents we have prepared across the street to the probate court and file them. They detail your breach of duty, your fraudulent dealings, and your attempted illegal eviction. I will then personally make a call to the New York State Department of State, which governs real estate licenses. I will forward them the entire file. You will lose your license. You will face sanctions from the court. The developer you were in business with will be named in a suit. Your professional life, as you know it, will be over." Ethan's lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently to him. Ethan didn't seem to hear. He just stared at the letter. He looked up finally, and his eyes met mine for the first time that day. They were filled with a toxic mixture of resentment, defeat, and, for a fleeting moment, a sliver of shame. He saw me, truly saw me, not as his quiet older sister, but as the person who held his entire future in her hands. His lawyer spoke for him. We would like a moment to discuss this." "There is nothing to discuss," Maria said firmly. "There is only a choice. Option 1 or option 2, you have 5 minutes." The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, each second marking the collapse of Ethan's carefully constructed world. He had built his life on an image of success, of being the smart one, the one who always came out on top. And now, he had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered by the sister he had so foolishly underestimated, armed with nothing but the truth and the love of an aunt who had known him better than he knew himself. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy and low. It wasn't directed at his lawyer or at Maria. It was directed at me. "You could have just taken the money, Jen." It was a pathetic last gasp, an attempt to reframe his defeat as my fault. I looked back at him, my heart steady, my voice clear. "You could have just honored her wishes, Ethan." That was it. The finality of my words seemed to break him. He deflated, the last ounce of defiance gone. He looked at his lawyer, a man he was paying to Ave him and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The lawyer turned to Maria and cleared his throat. "We accept the terms of option 1, he said quietly. "Draw up the papers." The signing of the documents was a somber, silent affair. Ethan's hand shook as he affixed his signature to the agreement that undid his entire scheme. He signed the withdrawal of the eviction. He signed the forms recognizing my tenancy. He signed his resignation as executor. With each stroke of the pen, he was dismantling the authority he had abused and cementing his own defeat. When it was over, he stood up, pushed his chair in, and walked out of the conference room without another word, not once looking in my direction. The war was over. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from Ethan's actions rippled through our family. A neutral third party, a cousin we both respected, was appointed by the court to take over as executor. Once the full story came out, backed by the undeniable evidence, the relatives who had called to pressure me now called to apologize. Ethan and Sabrina became social pariahs, their greed laid bare for all to see. His grand deal with the developer had evaporated, and with it, his reputation in the cutthroat world of New York real estate. While I had not pursued official sanctions, the story of his misconduct circulated, and the consequences were professionally devastating. He had not gone to jail, but he was trapped in a prison of his own making, marked by the permanent stain of his disgrace. My relationship with my brother was shattered, perhaps irreparably. There was no tearful reconciliation, no dramatic confrontation where he begged for forgiveness. There was only a vast, cold silence between us. I knew that healing, if it ever came, would be a journey of years, not days, and the first step would have to be his. I wasn't filled with hatred for him, only a profound and weary sadness for the man he had chosen to become. My true reconciliation was with the apartment itself and with the memory of Aunt Helen. In the quiet evenings, I would sit in her favorite armchair, the notarized letter resting on the table beside me. I had won more than just a legal battle. I had defended a legacy. I had honored the woman who had sheltered and loved me. I had protected our home. Slowly, carefully, I began to make the apartment my own. I didn't paint over the walls or tear down the bookshelves as Sabrina had so eagerly planned. Instead, I wove my own life into the fabric of the place. I bought a new, comfortable sofa but kept Helen's armchair. I added my own books to her sprawling collection, my volumes of legal history sitting beside her beloved poets. I filled the space not with expensive renovations, but with life, with the scent of baking bread, the sound of music, and the presence of friends who came to celebrate my victory. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few months after it was all over, I was cleaning out a small desk in what was now my home office. Tucked in the back of a drawer, I found a small, framed photograph I hadn't seen in years. It was of me and Ethan as children, sitting on the steps of this very apartment building. We were grinning, missing our front teeth, his arms slung protectively around my shoulder. For a moment, my chest ached with the loss of that boy, of the brother I thought I had. But then my gaze shifted to the window, to the view of the park, its leaves turning gold in the autumn light. I thought of Aunt Helen, of her strength, her wisdom, and her fierce, protective love. She had given me more than just a home with a view. She had given me the strength to fight for it. She had left me a shield. The peace I felt in that moment was deep and abiding. The battle was over, and the silence in the apartment was no longer one of grief, but of tranquility. Justice had been served, the conflict was resolved, and the antagonist was facing the consequences of his actions. I was safe. I was vindicated. I was home.